We know the value of art. We know what culture brings to our life. And yet we have to convince the powers that be that this is a good thing to do.
We all love culture, but no one wants to fund it. And public cuts have been happening since 2010 drastically across all governments.
Marine Tanguy is the founder and CEO of MTArt Agency, the world's first talent agency for visual artists, and one of the most consistent and combative voices making the economic case for culture in our cities.
I think one number I always love to give, because it's horrific, is that 4 out of 5 billboards in the UK are in working class areas, which means sadly the poorer you are, the more exposed you are to commercial imagery, and obviously the more dreadful it is to your mental health, but also the least exposed you are to the arts.
Marine has published academic papers with both Warwick University and UCL's Bartlett, building the framework for how public art in cities should be valued, not just aesthetically, but economically, socially, and in terms of mental health and community cohesion.
So we need to start thinking, how do we equalize that access? Who funds it? How do we get together to fund it? Now that we know we don't have to over-privilege again, culture has that value. We know it has healing impact as well. We know how good it is for us. Why don't we just step up in making sure that it's even more preserved?
He has given 3 TEDx talks, been named Forbes 30 Under 30 Europe in Art and Culture, and has previously won the NatWest UK Entrepreneur of the Year award.
If you start to compromise on this, in 10 years' time, we'll have to pay the price of this. And then that price will be substantially more expensive.
Hello, welcome to Talking Place, the podcast bringing placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place. I'm your host, Tanisha Raffiuddin. I am the founder of Concept Culture, a creative agency in London passionate about creating purposeful brands and telling powerful stories. In this episode, I talk place with Marine Tanguy. Marine Tanguy is the founder and CEO of MTArt Agency, the world's first talent agency for visual artists. MTArt Agency manages careers, secures brand partnerships, public commissions, and institutional placements, and actively places artists inside the built environment, in streets, in buildings, in the urban fabric that surrounds daily life. Marine is also the author of The Visual Detox. Marine is Rosewood London's placemaker and is an investor in art tech companies. We recorded this conversation at South by Southwest London 2026 in the heart of Shoreditch, where street art and artistic murals can be found on every corner. This episode makes the economic, social, and moral case for art as urban infrastructure, and does so with numbers, not just conviction. All right, let's talk place.
Marine, welcome to the Talking Place podcast.
My pleasure. So nice to be here.
And as everyone can see, we're here at South by Southwest London.
Pretty obvious.
Yes, in the thick of it, in the heart of all the action here in Shoreditch. So let's get right into it. So this podcast is about place. And a question I ask every guest is, what does place mean to you, and what does good look like?
I mean, obviously, I'm very biased to think a great place will obviously have art in it, because otherwise I would not be believing in what I'm saying. I mean, London for me, I was so happy when South by came to London, because London is that great place. I mean, also, I got my kids here, I built my business here, I published here. So much of my memories with friends is cycling through this city, and I know the city so well through cycling as well. It's an amazing place. So I've always had such a fond, deep connection with London. It is home for that reason. And back to, I think, culture is probably why, which probably wrap up all the conversation we had on how big culture plays a part in making you feel really at home in the place that you live in. But London is that place for me. I think the festival being here makes so much sense, because you're the top tech people, creative people, investors, entrepreneurs, it's all here, and it's all on us to make sure that it continues.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have a favorite place in the world?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, big London fan, and like, as you can hear, but I think, again, when you build a business, and I also publish for Penguin here in English, it's a burst of business, it's a burst of a book, it's a burst of 3 kids. Like, I pass a hustle where I gave birth to my kids almost on a daily basis. I think this has to be one of the most meaningful places for you. Past this is very hard to think of a different meaningful place. All those things are the most meaningful thing that have happened to me.
So you created one of the world's first talent agencies for visual artists. What was your driving force behind that?
So I was very lucky to have my first business in Los Angeles and be mentored by a character that everyone knows called Michael Lovitz, who built CAA. And what I saw in LA is that, you have the top talent agencies backing sportive musicians and actors. The art world was very focused on the object. I felt, what if we could just back the artists instead? And through backing the artists, you open so many revenue streams. You open public art projects, brand partnership, digital partnership, entertainment partnerships, but also in a world, the art world, that's very small in terms of audiences, you open the audiences too. So suddenly you just get to inspire many more people. And that was a vision from the get-go. We got lucky that we got to realize this vision. And yeah, it's amazing. Like right now we have artworks in the streets of the city. We did the documentary David Attenborough, all the land art was for him. The Art of Emily in Paris as well. We do also museum partnerships. Like we've really expanded the definition of where art should be and how artists should be weaved into the fabric of society.
Yes, no, like I said when we first met, that I've been following your journey on LinkedIn, and I'm so fascinated and inspired by what you've created here. I'm very much interested in culture and how culture impacts cities, and how it ultimately impacts the way we interact with our cities. You've published academic work on how to value public art in cities. Yeah. Can you talk us through the framework you use to do this?
Yeah, of course. So I published both with Warwick and UCL, obviously with Bartlett at UCL. My issue always is that the art world is not good, also is changing, and same with the creative sector, at measuring its impact. And that's not just economical, but it's also at societal level. So when we started, everyone was like, well, of course you can do public art, but it will be free for the artists and a bit of exposure, and they will feel very fortunate. And I am a strong believer that art and artists deliver a huge amount of value. And that also is tangible economically, whether that's in terms of retail and footfall and marketing and connection to the place and placemaking. So depending on the papers, because at this stage there's been a few, we've surveyed communities and their relation to the place through public arts and how willing they'll be to pay for it, which the results were very high. We've also demonstrated that it could really revitalize, like create a center in the place you're putting public art in, attracts new audiences, attracts new conversations, heighten the connection to the place, heighten the sentiment that you have towards this place and how often you visit it and how you position it culturally. All the things that actually we know, but we are very keen to, put some numbers to it and tend to be very often the only person in the creative sector in that room where all the figures are being discussed. And that's a lot of our vision, is how do we constantly show that the creative sector, which is the number 2 sector in the country for 140 billion in revenue, is not some kind of niche passion project, but actually the heart and core of the country we're in and the heart of core on the world we live in as well.
No, definitely. I've heard it in the UK. I feel like culture is one of the UK's strongest exports.
Exactly.
Everybody listens to English music and watches English
and
sports
films,
and films and everything.
Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated by, like you said, if we know the value of art, we know what culture brings to our lives. We've seen what happened during COVID when we were locked down in our homes, and yet we have to convince the powers that be that this is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
It always baffles me.
Well, I think the paradox of the cultural sector is based on that, where it's culturally vibrant. We all love culture. The agencies are on the rise, and they've only been on the rise, as you said, since COVID as well. But no one wants to fund it. And public cuts have been happening since 2010 drastically across all governments. And I think the business that I built was answering that. It was like, let's make it a business proposition. We're a big corp, obviously. We have all with social values, but it is a business. It's an economic, and it makes sense economically to be doing that. And for me, I really wanted to prove that artists can be part of that economical conversation. But yes, if you ask anyone, yes, culture matters, but who's going to fund it? No one seems to be raising their hands. So I think for us, we were very pushy about the economical discourse.
So can you give us an example, or maybe a couple of examples of cities that are doing it well?
Yeah, I mean, look, London is funding culture, and I think the mayor and the team of Justin Simmons have done a brilliant job. And of course, I think the new openings of the V&A East is a brilliant example of how institutions are opening up beyond what we know of them. It reminds me so much of LACMA, who in LA goes beyond the frame of the museum. It's also on the streets and it's built up, and I think that's so much of my vision of institutions. And I went to the childhood museum for kids, but I have luckily myself 3 kids, and And again, the V&A has done such a brilliant job in all audiences, and you see how they rethought the brand too. So I think, we're in a place where there's amazing institutions where the city backs it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a brilliant example. But then Sydney will be another great example. I mean, our
Nice.
common friend Sherry would tell
Yes.
you all about that. It's a really great place for this. I was very inspired by Michael Bloomberg in New York because they were one of the few to think again on the impact of artwork right in the center, like a Times Square. And again, the impact this could have in comparison of commercial imagery. And so I was really inspired by this. But then if you look at cities like Lyon or Paris, they're now pushing outdoor advertising tax that then goes on to fund the arts as well and creativity. So there's definitely change. I think people are waking up to the fact that, especially in the rise of AI, we cannot afford to lose creativity, and our creators are the beating heart of the city, and we would need to back them up. But so I think there's many examples.
So conversely, what do you think would happen if a city didn't put art on its agenda or put culture as an afterthought?
Well, I think we've seen it post-COVID, even in a city like London, like the places that were only desk and offices were looking incredibly dead, and there were ghost towns, and that's why it's something that when everyone over the last year was saying, I want to leave London. And then I won't call the places I want to replace it with, but there's like 5 streets in comparison of London. I mean, we are at South by Southwest, where in just the 15 minutes that I walked between the 2 locations, there's such a diversity of thinking, people, ideas, murals, like art. It's like, for me, I just wouldn't want to stop it for the world. I would absolutely want to pay more taxes wise to get for that. I might just be very unpopular at this. And I'm throwing this out there, but I feel like I tangibly see the value of culture and access to culture in my city. And I see why, as an expat, I chose London based on that. And I think we have many like this. London was just elected 2 weeks ago as the best cultural city in the world. And I think there's clearly many of us who think that's a very valuable asset. Now, how do we articulate and get people to think, you know what, I will go and support that extra? That's probably a step 2. But yes, I am a product of someone that shows London because of this cultural diversity.
Well, I can resonate with that. Like, even I moved to London like over 15 years ago, and I keep coming back to London. I've traveled all over the world, visited over 300 cities, and I still believe categorically that London has the most diverse cultural offer. Like,
For sure.
they say if you get bored of London, you get bored of life. And there's a truth to that. Like, I think you could go, every day to a different show, and you would still not see all of them. Just as an example, for the tier 2 cities out there, tier 3 cities out there, what would your advice be to them?
So first of all, like if you look at the country, what we might call it tier 2, tier 3, like Manchester did a brilliant job. And actually for some of it, they're more participatory than London is. Liverpool did a brilliant job. Like York did a brilliant job as well, with the Yorkshire Museum as well, and Sculpture Park and all the scenes of artists that they have. Margate did a brilliant job. So I feel this is again on. It's a nice time to praise also tier 2 cities. I mean, I grew up in the countryside, so I'll always be on the side also of the years of guys. But I have so many examples just for the country where I was saying, let's listen to what Manchester is doing right now and commissioning public art and how participatory they are. There's plenty to learn outside of London. But I think it's always a case of resources. What resources do they have? How can we increase the resources? How can we make sure that everyone has the right access to culture? I think one number I always love to give, because it's horrific, is that 4 out of 5 billboards in the UK are in working class areas, which means sadly, the poorer you are, the more exposed you are to commercial imagery, and obviously the more dreadful it is to your mental health, but also the least exposed you are to the arts. So we need to start thinking, how do we equalize that access? Who funds it? How do we get together to fund it? Now that we know we don't have to overprove it again, culture has that value. But I think that number, 4 out of 5, is huge. Me walking through the Truman Brewery back here and back at Protein Studio, the amount of art I've just seen, most of these kids will never see it for a while, and I think we need to kind of remind, how do we expand that experience beyond the world where we evolve in.
And you made an interesting point, and I think a very important line about the impact of art and culture on our mental well-being. Mental well-being. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, So I always talk about the visual environment, not just art for this, because I believe that your exposure to nature is just as important as your exposure to the arts. There's an amazing woman who didn't get enough credit called Octavia Hill, who was under John Ruskin and who founded the National Trust. They were about to put buildings on Hyde Park Corner in Hampstead Heath, and she reminded herself that when she was homeless on the street, access to public spaces like a park was so meaningful to her. And that's the foundation of National Trust. So I'll put art and nature at the same level when it comes to mental health. We live in a country where we have 1 tree per person, so actually it's very high, it's very good. Exposure to art in London is also very high. Mental health-wise, you have many benefits. You have cohesion of a community, the conversations you will start. If you're in an area surrounded by art, it's proven that you have substantially more conversation with people that surrounds you, which, as we know, conversations are incredibly important in the current time. It's also self-worth and self-confidence. You feel valued. Someone has added art where you are. There's a storytelling and a sense of self that also is connected to this. And just the fact that it's not yet something advertising at you and telling you to buy yet another thing and increasing that kind of dopamine of anxiety. Art, as we know, calm your nervous system and makes you think of the bigger picture. And when you have the more exposed kids are to creativity, also the better. We know it has healing also impact as well. So, I mean, it's endless. I think, as you can see, I'm very biased, but I think when we know how good it is for us, why don't we just step up in making sure that it's even more preserved?
Recently I saw, you talked about London being the #1 city rated for culture and Time Out. And there's a press release about a new venue that's being proposed, which will supplement Wembley and O2. And a lot of the commentary on the social media was like, oh, but we have an affordable housing crisis.
Yeah.
We do not need this venue.
Yeah.
What would you say to...
Look, I mean, first of all, I speak from a privileged position where I am lucky to be living in central London in a time that we are. So I definitely don't want to diminish the rise of living cost crisis. It's absolutely horrendous. And I think it goes back with, sadly, the ones that are affected by commercial imagery and the most horrid visual environment are also the ones that are affected right now by the rise of living crisis. I do think that we can't put that on the same budget bracket. Having said that, it's like comparing something very short term with something long term. And I get, as a business founder, it would be like comparing your cash flow with your vision. And believe me, it's very hard as a business founder too, right? Because sometimes you only have 1 month to go and you're super stressed financially, but yet you still have to be making the right decision long term. I think that's kind of the same thing as a cash flow management issue. Yes, I get that it's very tough right now. But London is the place that it is, having given loads of creative opportunities, job opportunities, attracted talents, attracted companies, attracted people building wealth and therefore supporting jobs because of the cultural place that it is. And unfortunately, the two have to run by side, which is how do we support people with this rise of the cost of living and obviously the inflation that's happened everywhere, alongside how do we sustain the vision that London has and had, because we've had the tangible results of this. And sadly, this is always difficult. But if you start to compromise on this, in 10 years' time, we'll have to pay the price of this. And then that price will be substantially more expensive. I think anything to do with culture, sustainability is all long-term. And there's no one wants to fund it in the current timing because it's too, everyone wants to be on the short-term level. Yes. And I think that might answer also the paradox on why the cultural sector struggles to be funded. We get to see results on mental health, on societal cohesion, on education for our kids, on all of these things through the long term. You won't get suddenly someone feeling better in like one day. It doesn't work that way. And yet equally, our society will get sick if we don't take care of our mental health, if we don't take care of our creativity, if we don't, take care of our social cohesion and community. So it's a mixed answer, but it shows that sadly short-term and long-term always have to run by my side. And I'm equally as worried when people start dropping off the sustainable agenda, because that's the same kind of long-term perspective and we'll have to bear the same high cost.
Yeah, I think we live in a world where instant gratification seems to be normal. We are so impatient that we can't wait for the delayed gratification. But, we live in an increasingly fragmented society, UK being multicultural and all that. Do you think public art can positively shape our sense of collective belonging?
Yeah, and I would link it to the stadium as well. Shared moment. I read recently, and not to criticize a very known podcast, but there was a comment on that man had had 3 glasses of wine and then entirely his whole few days derailed. But the point of it, and not to encourage any form of alcoholism here, but I think what was missed on is the fact that sometimes having 1 glass of wine may be a shared moment with your friends where you're finally letting go and having a conversation. The reason I say this is because we just did a land art of the Six Nations for women. It was the first time they played the main stadium last month. I got to be in that stadium with 31,000 people and watching those little girls, watching their rugby players for the first time female, playing in that main stadium. It's something that it doesn't have a price. The sentiment of cohesion, of community, of feeling so close to your neighbors, even though you're so different, means the world. Another example is maybe for the ones who live in London, you will know the Diana's Fountain in Hyde Park.
Yes.
Obviously, the heat wave was last week. This was packed with kids of parents. But again, you forget about background, you forget about social and cultural backgrounds, and you're all side by side. Removing those places and not building them is problematic in a time, like you said, it's being fragmented. And I think the only link I was putting to alcohol is like more hospitality, going to the restaurant and having a meal or it's part of all the same things of just us as human beings interacting. And whether you're doing side by side in a fountain, similar to screaming kids, or in a stadium or at a restaurant, you are being reminded that all of us as human beings go through things that are very similar. You need to have those places in a city. It's almost a role of it in a space that is civic, that you encounter each other and get to have a nice time together. You can't remove the nice time because that will be very problematic.
Yeah. And you've said that you want art to be part of our everyday civic experience, everyday lives, and not necessarily something that you just go to a museum or a gallery to see. Would you say that fundamentally then changes what art is or what its purpose is?
I think for sure. I think by definition, if something is part of the everyday, is substantially more civic and central to your life. But then again, I see art and artists as very central to life. Especially in a time where you want artists to be able to critically challenge the world around us. I mean, with AI, we need endless amount of visual critical thinking per se, right? So they're very valuable, but therefore, public art by definition inserts yourself on your commute, as you just have a few minutes and then it just takes you out of it. But that's why I find it so valuable, because it is when you're lost in your commute and probably have a bit of anxiety or deep in your thoughts that it just snaps you out of it. And creativity does that. Leaving it to just visiting a museum every month or every couple of months, which obviously I love museums, just removes entirely the role of creativity that you could have in the everyday. Like ideally, you want a life where you encounter creativity on a as regular basis as possible. So hopefully public arts introduces this.
And you mentioned AI, the buzzword here. I feel like it's on every conference track here at South by Southwest. How do you see AI impacting creativity in the long run?
I mean, it's already happening. In reality, like if you're a graphic designer, you're probably partially out of jobs in the current context. For me, the MIT report was very clear. 45% of cognitive abilities have decreased with people who overuse AI. We are creatives. Like you and I use our brains on a daily basis. How do we train that brain and continue training it is going to be a pretty big question. And I get concerned about the fact that we're not thinking harder about this. I also get concerned about the fact that we're not thinking about the ethics of AI more substantially from a sustainable perspective, but also as who is actually reconciling those images in a poor country being paid like a couple of dollars to do so, which we know is a huge crisis in terms of workforce. Equally, I am married to a VC where his investment in healthcare endometriosis, pelvic floor, arguably revolutionary for us, like scanning breast cancer, scanning all those things through the use of AI. It's going to be amazing. But I feel I definitely am, clearly, as you can hear from me, not rushing in just with pure excitement. I think we have to sort out regulation, ethics, like who owns it, who owns the rights, who owns the data, the place of creativity within this. And we have a great role to play as creative because, again, being people who can critically challenge things is going to be very relevant in this context.
Yeah. Just to echo what you're saying, my concern is about meaning. Like, we're seeing so much AI generated content on our feeds on social media. Nowadays, you look at videos and you're like, okay, this is AI. And, are we going to then just lose all meaning and everything that makes us human if we're just going to rely purely on the computer to create content?
Well, I think the I was speaking about Ayn Rand this weekend because we had a dinner for lots of entrepreneurs will probably connect with Atlas Shrugged, which is quite a controversial book that she put in the 50s. But the problem is there will always be a thinking class. If you look at the Silicon Valley and most of the kids don't use too much AI, or are very regulated. The problem, back to my stats of 4 out of 5 billboards in working class areas, is who's going to consume that AI content. I'm lucky again to have a school for my kids where there's very few kids in it. They're nicely followed. They come home, their parents ask questions. They're very educated about it. It's again a further class divide if we don't make it an educational one where we get educated about how to use the tool. We get educated about how to challenge the tool. All these things are great if on super intelligence, if actually you know how to use it and you best use the tool, but that's not the reality. We've seen that with social media. The reality is benefited to a few. I'm one of them. Our reach has been great through this, but it's also destroyed the brain of many people. And we could just find ourselves in the exact same position according to MIT for AI, and that will be a further class divide. And that's again what worries me with it.
Yeah, no, you're so right. So final thoughts. So if a developer, asset manager, or local authority wants to do something different with their next development, what would you advise them to do?
Hopefully that they don't just see art as a bit of a tick that is an afterthought. As you know, the earlier you speak with the architects, the earlier you speak with the artists, the better. So it's just collaboration. You're in a great place here where collaboration can happen really fast. There's so many stories that are not being told. 97% of the sculptures on our street are men on a pedestal. So you can endlessly tell stories that are shared collective experiences, like grief or anything like this, that we all go through, that is not told on our streets. So try and think, before just adding yet another bit of color and without much afterthoughts, what are the many stories that will make so many difference to people in feeling seen that are currently not on the fabric of my city?
And you mentioned the risk of not prioritizing art and culture in our cities, when what a 10-year scenario might look like. But what does a culturally thriving city or thriving place look like in the next 10 years?
Well, I'm going to answer on behalf of London, therefore, for this. We need to retain our artists. We just backed a series of free studios for creators and artists, but you need to retain your artists and entrepreneurs. Me arriving and working at Costa Coffee on Zone 2 and then going to Harrods for an internship to pay for BBC is not possible anymore. You couldn't leave on Zone 2 from Costa Coffee. I think it was something like 800 or £900, but it was very small. And then Harrods, luckily, was higher. But my point is that we need to retain our students, we need to retain our creative entrepreneurs and people starting things from scratch, and our artists. Goes back to your question on inflation. We need to think of a space. I benefited from a free hot desk from Camden. It's called the Camden Collective. And it was amazing to be given a desk, right at the start. And, it was tiny, and I'm now endlessly giving back to Camden. Camden could ask me anything, I would say yes to it. Because you're so grateful that someone trusted you for the first time. And so I think we need to just think, where are those places? Obviously, the Mayor of London cares a lot about this, but it's places where creatives can make things happen, and same with entrepreneurs, and same with artists, and same with students.
And what's your message to the upcoming generation of artists and cultural thinkers?
Well, I think keep challenging. I think everyone is saying you hop on the bandwagon, but don't, you can absolutely teach yourself and learn about all the new tech tools, but by all means, use your brain as well on ethics and how the tools in the first place are working and with society at large, because we need critical minds.
And are you optimistic about our collective future?
I'm critical. It's hard to be optimistic in the context. I'm critical. But I working insanely hard to make sure that it will be positive from our side and our corner. But I'm definitely critical.
And on that note, I would like to thank you for talking place to me. You've built something really phenomenal. I've been following your journey on LinkedIn. And I love what you do in terms of advocating for women artists and women in art, and, all the groundbreaking work that you're doing, and, and you're putting your, money in your mouth, as your advice was to challenge people. And
money, head, everything is on the table.
Everything is on the table. So, Marine, thank you so much for talking place with me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your South by Southwest London. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to join the conversation on social media with the hashtag #TalkingPlace. I would also love for you to leave our podcast a review and subscribe to all our podcasts and YouTube channels so you don't miss an episode. There's so much more to explore when it comes to creating good places, and I'm excited to do a deep dive into other topics with you in our next episode. I'm Tanisha Raffiuddin, and it's been my pleasure to be your podcast host. Thank you for listening. See you again next time, where we'll continue talking place. Talk soon.